Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. This afternoon's webinar is all about CPD, talking about the ways that we use CPD effectively, how it has most impact, and what we can do as practitioners using mathematics mastery to be able to develop teachers as much as we can using CPD. We're aiming for around 45 minutes, but if we get a little bit carried away, we might be a little bit more than that. If we're really succinct, we might be a little bit shorter than that. So we'll see how it goes. We're super lucky to be joined in this webinar by a few colleagues who use Maths Mastery, but also use lots of other CPD and have got lots of experience in using CPD in different ways to be able to have impact both in schools and across wider networks as well. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Anthony Latham. I'm a lead senior delivery manager and I work with Art Curriculum Plus and Mathematics Mastery. I'll come to Rhiannon.
Hi there, I'm Rhiannon Thomas. I'm an assistant head teacher at Arc Academy Primary School and maths lead.
Great. And Teresa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Teresa and I am a maths lead at Seymour, one of our schools in TCAT, and I'm also the network lead practitioner for TCAT as well, leading maths across our trust.
That's great. And we're also joined by Sophie, who works at Art Curriculum Plus, and Sophie will be manning the chat and doing some of the QA things. So if you need any support, or you've got any questions, please do use the chat or the QA function, and she'll be able to field any of those. Okay, so the way that we're going to work is we're going to use a bit of a Q&A. We're going to have some rough topics that we're going to talk about to do with CPD and using effective CPD, and we'll just go through and give our panelists an opportunity to discuss some of their strategies, some of the things that they do to be able to do things effectively, and go from there. Before we launch ourselves into some of the key questions, just want to reflect a little bit on professional development at AC Plus and what we see as our view of professional development. In terms of professional development, it's a huge part of what we do, and it's one of the things that we think makes us stand out as opposed to other organizations in terms of the amount we invest in teachers and our mastery leads development in order to be able to effectively run the program. Successful implementation, as we know from our partner schools, depends on teachers' subject knowledge and their pedagogical understanding, and investing as much time as possible in developing that, we feel is absolutely worth it. We know that value by what we do in our CPD and the feedback we get from our teachers and our maths leads about the impact it's had in their schools and with their pupils. So as much as possible, and I think this is a theme we're going to come back to over the session, we try and make sure that CPD isn't just standalone, that as much as possible it's cohesive and it progresses over time. So all of our CPD is part of a wider journey. We start that with our induction training and making sure that every single member of staff has had full inductions, they know how to use the resources effectively. That said, we try not to throw everything at them at once, because in our experience, it can be hugely overwhelming to do that. So induction training is about getting the basics in place and knowing from a starting point, this is the stuff you need to be able to access and be able to teach from day one. Beyond that, we then start thinking about, okay, what is it that someone who's a maths lead needs to be able to deliver the program effectively and support their teachers, and what is it that teachers need in that first year to be able to develop their practice moving forward. And then year on year, we think about, okay, as you're more skilled, what do you then need to build on top of that? So it's kind of that layered approach, almost like a cumulative curriculum you might use with your pupils. Same approach, same kind of theory behind it. So if you're looking for examples of this, we do have things called our CPD calendars, which show you a really clear idea of the CPD that you'll be doing, not just over a term, over a year, but like we look at it as like a 3-year cycle. So here's an example of what your teachers might be doing. So you can see here that you've got 9 different modules, and you might look at this as a 3-year cycle. However, some of our schools accelerate that and might try and do it more often. So you're not doing what we might describe as termy modules. So module 1 in autumn, module 2 in spring, and so on. You might do 2 in each one if you want to accelerate that process a little bit more. But you can see there in the first year implementing maths mastery in your classroom, we're looking at those basic skills that teachers should need to be able to implement it effectively. Then we start looking at the pedagogy behind it in that second year. And then the third year, we're really starting to elevate practice as much as possible. On top of that, we've got things we call our subject knowledge development sessions, and these are all about preparing teachers to teach on a term-by-term basis. As much as possible, we're really trying to focus on getting them to use the data and getting them to think about where their pupils are in their class and adapting the materials effectively to be able to do that. We then think about our leaders. We have our program leadership modules, and for these are termly modules that leaders will attend, and it's all about developing them and think about the skills they need to be able to develop their teachers. So again, in our first year, we've got establishing a vision and leading a team. The second year is think about effective implementation, and all of these are designed to sync with what the teachers might be doing in that term. So by the end of this process, we really hope that our mastery leads, our maths leads would be fully skilled up and really confident in leading the program effectively. One thing that I know our panelists will talk about as we go through this, so I'm not going to delve into it too much with them, but we have other CPD, because for us, CPD isn't about always attending independent sessions. The best CPD is integrated and happening day by day with teachers to make it happen. So as much as possible within units, you will find embedded PD in everything we do. We have lots of a suite of resources. If you spot a need as a maths lead, then you can identify, okay, I need to work on coaching with my team. You can find the right resources from our whole school workshops, or perhaps it's subject knowledge that you need to develop. Again, we've got a suite of subject knowledge workshops that you can use to develop subject knowledge with your team. In terms of collaboration, we've also got our annual conference that we have as well. Okay, that is definitely enough from listening to me talk. So let's go over to our panel. So the first topic or theme I want to discuss is the different types of CPD which is being used in schools. So I just want to come to our panelists and just ask, what different types of CPD do you use to develop teaching in your school? And Rhiannon, if we come to you first, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So linking to what you said a moment ago around that induction training, we've got lots of ECTs this year, which is really exciting for us. So we've kind of accessed that for their induction just to make sure they're really secure on how to use the Maths Mastery programme and kind of the rationale behind it. In terms of whole school development, through things like monitoring, like learning walks, booklets, Maths Mastery Development Day, where someone will come in and kind of guide us with our next steps. We then just decide on our whole school action steps for our training. And this training may also link to kind of wider themes of our Academy improvement plan as well. For example, Oracy's been on our AIP this year, so we've had some training on things like mathematical talk and using mathematical vocabulary, which links really nicely to the Maths Mastery programme. And for this CPD that we did on an inset and after school CPD, I was able to kind of access the Maths Mastery platform to kind of use as a bit of a springboard then for the training slides, which was really helpful. For staff CPD, as Anthony was talking about, kind of that day-to-day stuff, we've got a coaching model at our school. So every teacher will have a coach, and that might be a member of SLT or a middle leader. And we use something you might be familiar with. It's the see it, name it, do it model, which is very scripted and means that the coachees will see their next step in action. They can then practice this with the support of their coach before they kind of take that action step and roll it out into their practice. Action steps might include things on planning as well, which you might kind of speak to the maths lead about. And you might look at some of those resources that are available on Maths Mastery, like the learning journey, or engage with some of those videos that are on there to kind of help them decide what they might need to make that unit more effective. We also have termly booklets too, and this is done by subject leads, and we'll have different focuses. For example, it might be like reasoning we've looked at in one booklet, or responding to marking, and teachers were then provided with feedback from that booklet, and if a little more support might be needed, we might speak to the coaches and kind of make an action step for that. That's kind of what our CPD looks like in our school for maths at the moment.
That's great, thank you. Loads of questions, I suppose, but I think we're going to cover some of those later. So the first thing I was thinking about is that's loads of stuff. How does that all fit in? But I think we'll talk about that a little bit later anyway. Thank you very much, Rhiannon. Teresa, you got anything to add in terms of other things you might be doing in your school or trust?
Yeah, so just to build on some of those wonderful things that Rhiannon mentioned that are just such good practice for schools, we've also taken a lot of the CPD from the My Mastery platform and tailored it to you. So things like the training and the SKUs, which I'll talk about later, but we've kind of built that into our training module, or sort of our CPD module as well, where we've had the program for a number of years now. So those sorts of things we use quite early on. But because we've kind of embedded the program over a number of years now, we tend to still drip feed training into sort of weekly segments for staff, and we call those teaching toast sessions. So they happen once a week, and it's just a 10-minute sort of teaching and learning focus time that teachers attend, just to drip feed things in from maths, but from other areas of the curriculum as well, just so that we keep our school improvement plan actions at the forefront of our minds, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve our practice. We also have had a few ECTs join us this year, not only in my home school, but obviously across our trust as well. And we've got quite a developed induction plan that we've put in place for our ECTs and for any new members of staff that join school as well, because we're aware that Maths Mastery is embedded in quite a few of our schools now. So teachers that are coming in to the school maybe haven't done it before, we do have a fairly comprehensive induction plan that we follow as well, that involves things like co-planning with the maths lead, team teaching with the maths lead at the very beginning of the year, or on entry to the school. We look at things like trying to have the opportunity to release teachers out to see maths meetings and lessons being taught by experienced members of staff, so they can see the lessons and see the programme in action, hands-on. And that kind of evolves over the year, depending on what our school's needs are.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you. Again, some things I think we'll develop as we go through, particularly around how you're able to do some of those things and juggle all those things like team teaching and making all that happen. But I think we'll unpick that a little bit later, because I know some of the questions will have a look at it. So that's kind of our kind of starter for 10 question, as I would kind of refer to it. So let's now dig a little bit deeper. So I've spoken a bit about embedding the Maths Mastery CPD and what the Maths Mastery CPD is. We're also aware that you might be using other things and have other influences depending on what your school's needs are at the moment. So just wanted you to reflect a little bit on how you use perhaps the Mathematics Mastery CPD to meet the needs of your school and teachers, and then maybe a little bit, if you have tailored it, how you've tailored it to the needs of your school. Maybe we'll swap over and give Teresa a chance to speak first this time.
Yep, sure. So just kind of to reiterate the use of our induction plan for our new teachers, particularly, Maths Mastery is often a programme that teachers have not used before. So we use a lot of that in our induction plan, but we have made really good use of the SKUs and the whole school workshops, particularly with schools where the programme is new in. So we've built that into training sessions, staff meeting time, inset time, that sort of thing. We've also spent a lot of time working on adapting the Maths Mastery platform and the resources from it to make it bespoke for every school, to make sure that every school is meeting the needs of their children through the platform. And more trust-wide, we use our development sessions that we get as part of our package with Maths Mastery. So those sessions where a development lead visits the school or has an online session with the maths lead, we use them to tailor the support to individual schools and talk through specifics for each school, and then we can sort of put in bespoke training with that, so it doesn't always look the same in every school. Development leads are very happy to facilitate training if that's needed, or to run co-planning sessions or team teaching sessions when they come into schools. So we've kind of really been building how we use those sessions to really kind of, make the programme successful in our schools. We obviously ensure that new teachers attend the Maths Mastery induction, observe colleagues, as I've spoken about before, both teaching lessons and in maths meetings. And we tend to run on termly focuses as well. So we might pick out just one element of the programme and focus on that for a term with our newest staff. So it might be talk tasks and opportunities for talk at the beginning of the year, and then building onto mathematical thinking and conceptual understanding later on in the year. And obviously then this support is pared back over the year as those teachers become more confident.
Yeah, that's great. One thing you mentioned that I just wanted to dwell on a second was you mentioned about adapting a Maths Mastery like program, resources and things. That's something that quite a lot of our schools struggle with or feel like they're always wrestling with, is how much do you adapt it? How much do you maintain fidelity? Is that something in terms of like the ongoing CPD or the things that you do as a trust or a school that you try and support teachers with, and how do you do that?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the areas of the programme that we revisit very regularly, both as individual schools and as a trust, and kind of building that understanding with our senior leadership teams in schools and our maths leads, that the programme has thought of probably everything and more that you could possibly think of that you need to teach maths, but it's not something that you can just lift off and teach. You do have to tweak it to meet the needs of the children in your particular setting. So we've spent a lot of time working with schools on how they can do that effectively and how they can tweak the learning and the teaching and the resources that are needed, how they might add resources or reduce the number of slides if needed, dependent on the needs of the children that they're teaching.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that goes back to, I was reading the other day, the new EEF, so like guidance for implementation, and quite a lot of that talks about how you develop the environment in your school and the attitudes in your school and all those different factors that allow that successful adaptation to happen. And yeah, I think that's really important. Thanks, Teresa.
Absolutely, that's all right. Without losing the learning intention, that's the bit that we really focus on.
That's the tricky point, isn't it? Are you still getting what you wanted to out of that lesson, and how do teachers know that has happened with it, and teaching them and giving them that subject knowledge to be able to do that, I think.
Exactly.
Okay, Rhiannon, if we come over to you, if there's anything else you wanted to add or different points you wanted to make, did you remember the question? So we're looking at Maths Mastery, CPD and tailoring it. I feel like we may have veered off slightly.
Yeah, very similar to Teresa at our school as well. We really use that kind of training time to make sure that our CPD is tailored to the needs of teachers. And to do that, it's a lot to do with kind of in order to know what to train them on, it's all to do with our monitoring. Development days for Maths Mastery are really useful for us to kind of give us a really clear direction of where we need to go next as a school. We also use something called a Great Teacher Rubric to kind of assess teachers in a very consistent way across the school, which is really useful because then it provides us with kind of trends in next steps for teachers. So it might be a certain planning need or a different teaching and learning need that teachers have. For example, last term, from our monitoring, kind of our lowest 20% of prior retainers really came up as an area that we wanted to develop. So as maths subject leader, I had to think about what that might look like in my subject. So I then reached out to Maths Mastery and said, I want to do a little bit of training with teachers around scaffolding and kind of the rationale behind the way Maths Mastery scaffold and use concrete resources and things like that. So then I was sent lots of resources from Maths Mastery, training slides, etc. So I could look at that and then decide which parts are useful for our teachers, particularly our teachers who are new to teaching, who might need to go right back to the basics of, what are the strategies for scaffolding that Maths Mastery use, and how can they make sure that they're providing them to the correct children in their classroom. As I said before, Maths Mastery also have really useful videos attached to each unit as well, so that can be very useful during co-planning or coaching as a way for teachers to engage with CPD as well.
Do you ever have any resistance from teachers around videos?
I wouldn't say resistance, I'd say potentially accountability. If you were to just say, go and watch this video, teachers are so busy, it's whether they would set aside that time. I think those videos can be really far more powerful if it's done in a collaborative way. If you're sat down with your coach, like, let's take a look at the unit journey and think about your action step and how that might align with with the planning and, you know, how we can make it fit. Or if it was a case of you're planning with your year group partner in a training session. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our unit journey, if that was part of your CPD. I think it's not so much pushback, it's more making sure that you're holding them to account to do it, and it's often around doing it with someone who is holding them accountable, for example, in the CPD session or in the coaching session or in the co-planning session. That tends to be more useful for us.
Yeah, and then they also see the value of why they're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And you can unpick it together then as well, can't you? It's not just a video, go away and watch it, and you can also have a discussion about it. That can often be more beneficial for your teachers who are new to teaching.
Yeah, and I think there's that weird thing that when you're told to watch a video, even the video might be 2 minutes long, people would think, oh, it'd be quicker to read something. And actually, the lack of understanding you might get from reading how to do 3-digit by 2-digit multiplication and model it using Deans or whatever else it is can be so tricky and create so many misconceptions.
Yeah, and I do think the way that Maths Mastery do those videos are presented, it's very visual. It's almost like you're watching someone do the I do model before the teachers having to do it themselves. So especially for things like coaching, you know, I mentioned before, like our see it, name it, do it approach, watching those videos is kind of the see it, which can be really, really helpful.
Okay, yeah, that's great, Rhiannon. In terms of just referring back to a couple of things that Rhiannon's mentioned there, so the embedded videos that I did mention and Rhiannon spoke about there are embedded into every unit. So each unit you'll have perhaps 2 or 3 videos where we think there's tricky concepts or things that teachers may struggle to model or have difficulty with or just need a bit of a rehearsal with. So it's just showing you really clearly how you might model that. As Rhiannon mentioned, it's almost just mimicking what the I do might be in that phase. And then the other thing I was just going to refer back to, I think both Teresa and Rhiannon referred to development visits in there. So this is part of our school support offer. If you're in, depending on what package you've got with the program, you'll have regular school support from one of our development team. And that might be in the shape of a face-to-face school visit where they'll come in and work with your maths lead and work with specific teachers and on things that they're going to develop part of that school plan. Or potentially you might have development sessions, which are remote sessions, which happen online. But again, there's a clear agenda to that. And it's all about trying to make it as impactful as possible, focused on clear things and clear objectives that we have. So just wanted to clear up a couple of those in case they weren't particularly obvious. Okay, we'll move on slightly now. This possibly is the biggest thing, the biggest resistance we hear about when we talk about the importance of CPD from teachers. It is, well, that sounds great, brilliant, but my workload is huge. I've got 60 load of books that I've got to mark tonight, and I've got all this different stuff I've got to plan for tomorrow. I really can't do this CPD. So I really like to kind of unpick your brains on tips or strategies you've got when it comes to CPD. How do you work around teachers' busy schedules? Any tips you have, anything that has worked, or you can tell us about things that haven't worked, because that's equally important to get some information about. Should we come to you first this time, Rhiannon?
Yeah, we had some really interesting feedback from our staff survey around teacher workload, and CPD obviously is tied in with that. Something that teachers suggested in our survey was that sometimes giving over a CPD slot, for example, a training slot, giving that over to like key pinch points in the calendar, for example, like drop assessment week, or when your medium-term plan is due, and just trying to kind of make sure that you are giving teachers an appropriate amount of time for those really busy times in the calendar. We also, as I mentioned before, it's telling the teachers the why behind the training, and often the why is based around, monitoring and things that we need to do to move forward as a school and our kind of whole school next steps. And we do share those with the teachers. So I think that can be really important. For example, we were doing a whole school area was kind of participation and think ratio, kind of upping that across the school. So then our CPD then for a whole half term focused on participation and think ratio. And then as maths lead, I would again think about what that would look like in my subject. So we kind of do our CPD in half termly themes. So it just feels that bit more purposeful for teachers, like they're seeing their own learning journey and then how that looks, what that looks like in different subjects. So this term is our lowest 20%, and it is what that looks like across the curriculum and across the subjects. Yeah, I just think it helps teachers really understand the purpose behind the session and know what it is they're working towards as well. Helps with the buy-in, I think.
Yeah, and that's great. And that last little bit, I think, buy-in and then how you get buy-in, I think we can dwell on a little bit later. So I may circle back to that one if it's okay, around. That's great. Teresa, have you got anything to add in terms of teacher workload and how you can support it?
Yeah, so likewise, I mean, teacher workload is huge, and we're trying to constantly find ways to make CPD as easy and manageable as possible, so it's not adding overly to teachers already busy schedules. One thing I mentioned earlier, which I'll come back to now, are our teaching and toast sessions that a number of our trust schools run. So they're weekly 10-minute meetings at the beginning of the day, where we have a teaching and learning focus, and when that is a math session, we make sure we link that to what our current teaching and learning focus is for the term. So that's a really good way of just drip feeding in that essential kind of incremental CPD, if you like, so that it never kind of goes off the boil. People have always got it there in their minds. Something else we do, which we've just started this year, which has been successful in a number of our schools, is we've started holding watch parties. So once a term, we will invite teachers to come after school to the maths leads room, so my room or my co-maths leads room, and this happens in a number of our schools. They can bring their marking with them. We provide some refreshments, drinks and little cakes, because, you know, if you're going to do maths, I feel like you should feed people. That's always been my motto. And then people come along and we use some of the recorded training that is available that you showed at the beginning of the webinar, Anthony, the termly videos, and we will choose an appropriate one for the point where we are in the year, and we'll watch that and we'll pause it at points and we'll discuss it. But people feel like it's good value for time because they're able to interact and be part of that training and hear those messages, but also they can get on with important things like marking so that it's not taking up time. So we found that to be really successful. Something else one of our schools does, which is a great idea, is once a week the deputy head goes around with her iPad and she will capture on video just a small snippet of really good maths teaching or some sort of maths mastery focus on video that then she then shares with the rest of the staff through a weekly bulletin, and staff have found that to be really, really useful and impactful. And it's always nice when it's your video that gets shown in the week. So that's been a really successful way of, again, dropping in that CPD in a very easy kind of non-time consuming way, because you're teaching at the time anyway. And then I mentioned earlier as well about opportunities for team teaching and peer-to-peer observations, particularly at the beginning of the academic year, or particularly when a member of staff joins the school and is new to the programme. That's been really useful, but of course with that comes more difficulties in terms of enabling those members of staff to be released, enabling people to be out and about. It's been easy with our ECTs because they get designated time in the week where they should be out of class anyway, so we can utilise some of that time to go and watch and team teach with other teachers. But that's kind of the stumbling block for us has always been time and release capability, I think.
What about you as the maths lead? Right, because it's something quite a lot of schools I work with is getting that secured release time for your maths lead, and the importance that is in developing not just maths but any subject to be able to do that effectively. Yeah,
so I think with any subject, maths included, it's really important that maths release time is agreed and is regular and is ring-fenced almost by the school. And where that is the case, I feel like maths leads feel they're having a real impact. They can really move maths forward in their schools. But again, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And it comes down to timetabling, it comes down to staffing, where it's not so secure. having the opportunity sometimes to start the children off on an activity and doing a quick whip round a particular year group has been a model that some people have used to say, right, I'm going to start my children off and just leave them with the LSA for 10 minutes. I'm just going to pop in to see this year group because we were talking about this in PPA or something like that. That's another way around it, but it does present more challenges having that release time regular.
Yeah, I suppose it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if you look from, say, the head teacher's point of view, I can't give everyone release time. So from the maths subject leader, it's almost like trying to justify this is the impact. If you give me this release time, I'm going to do this, this, and this with it, and this is the potential impact it can have. So I think it is kind of, as a maths lead, trying to make sure you're organising your calendar and you're not just asking for release time, but making sure this is what I'm going to do over the next half term, and these are the teachers I want to support with it, and like really having that clear plan of how you're going to progress the subject moving from that release time.
And to echo what Rhiannon said as well about using those PD videos and encouraging staff to watch them in PPA time, they're such a useful resource, and it is great when teams can sit together and watch those, because it really does help build their subject knowledge and their understanding of what the children are going to cover, and potential misconceptions they can already be planning ahead. And something that we started doing as well is sharing those videos with our support staff as well, trying to utilise assembly times when perhaps support staff aren't necessarily needed in assembly for that point. And our support staff have found that hugely useful and impactful, because they then feel prepared when they're participating in those lessons as well.
So that's great. Thank you very much, Teresa. Okay, I'll move us on to our fourth question. So the next theme I wanted to explore a little bit is trying to get examples of great CPD and where CPD training has really worked and been really impactful, and what you did to make it impactful. So Teresa, if I come straight back to you, is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to kind of talk about this from a more trust-wide perspective. So as a trust, we get together as maths lead twice a year, face to face, if we can. That's always the plan. And we've kind of used those days to build maths lead subject knowledge primarily, and make sure that they are really secure in the program, they're really secure in leading the program, and also to try and give them training they can then take back to drop into their own CPD in their own schools. But over time, and as that's become more embedded, we've kind of grown that into now looking at how maths leads can have more of an impact in school, and how we can really develop their time, their use of time, which is where we have looked at use of our development visits and our development sessions, and how we can really maximise opportunities for those. And that's been really successful. So at the beginning of this year, something that came up through the development visits for a number of our schools across the trust was that maths meetings needed a bit of tightening up. We needed just to have a bit of a closer look, put a bit of a lens on those. So we were able to use some of those opportunities where all of our maths leads came together to really unpick those maths meetings. And we found that we put some things in place to support maths meetings in terms of some planning structures, some ideas for what you can use to include in your maths meetings. And as a result, we're now seeing that our maths meetings are more impactful and purposeful across the trust. For example, we wanted arithmetic to be a bit of a focus in maths meetings. So we've put together an arithmetic overview that maths leads have taken back to their schools, and now schools are using that in their maths meetings, and that's had a massive impact on our children's arithmetic ability, and then obviously their assessments as well.
Yeah, and I think arithmetic has come out as quite an important thing at the moment. It's something that we're looking at as an organisation to try and develop, particularly up in year 5 and 6, and trying to work with teachers to be able to make sure this isn't a really effective part of that maths meeting.
Yeah, that's definitely our next focus.
Yeah. Okay, if we go over to Rhiannon, have you got anything else around examples of great CPD?
Yeah, just from like a maths lead opinion, just for our primary, just some successful, one of the more successful sessions that or CPD that I led this year was we've been working on oracy as kind of part of our academy improvement plan, and within that, through kind of observing teachers, it came mathematical vocabulary was sometimes not was a bit of a weak point, particularly with our new teachers. So we wanted to work on this. So we did some CPD around it, and I think it was successful because we kind of really pitched the why to the teachers, drawing on lots of the evidence that Maths Mastery provides in their CPD. So we really had that buy-in from them straight away. We also shared lots of different strategies that the teachers could apply. We used videos that Maths Mastery used. The teachers could then kind of take it live and practice these different strategies, you know, my turn, your turn, looking at the star words, looking at the talk task, practice rolling them out in the CPD with the teachers that they're working with. I find that's really helpful when you are taking things live in the CPD session. You're kind of actually practicing that teacher role. We also gave them time in that CPD to edit the slides and kind of make sure that the next week's lessons had taken into account all the strategies we'd asked them to use for the mathematical talk. I just think it really kind of raises the accountability factor when you've given them a slot in the CPD to practice and add it to planning that's upcoming. And we knew that it was effective because then we went on to monitor, and that the mathematical vocabulary and talk then became our focus for that term. When we're looking at books, when we're going into lessons, you know, coaches knew what we were working on as well. So it was really married up, and the teachers knew what they were working on. They'd been given time to do it, and they knew that was what we were coming around to kind of evaluate how effective we were being, what our next steps were, and where we're at with the journey. So I think, yeah, that was one of our more successful CPDs, I think, for maths this year.
I think you've also hit on something there that I think is really important. So in terms of to give a kind of look behind the curtain, when we're creating CPD, one of the big things that we're looking at is the PD mechanisms from the EEF. So they give you like 14 mechanisms in 4 different categories, and we try and hit all 4 of those categories every time we're doing CPD. And something you mentioned there, Rhiannon, you were talking about each one. Whether you knew it or not, you were hitting all 4 of those different things. So like you were looking at their prior knowledge and what do our teachers know already. But actually one of the most important ones that you don't think about is like modeling it to them and giving them an opportunity then, once you've modeled it, for them to practice it as well. And then, okay, where are we going to take this next? How are you going to actually be able to embed it? And I think that's, to me, I think back to when I first started doing CPD in my school as a maths lead, I think that's the thing I didn't do. I didn't give them time to actually, like, you've now got half an hour to go, okay, how are you going to make this work next week in your lessons? But I think, yeah, that's what I take away, is like, it's really important to stress that's happening as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think teachers really appreciate that as well, don't they? You get more of that buy-in when they give, you know, time is always their issue, isn't it? Not enough time, we're all so busy, but building that into the session, you've provided that time, which I think is also very helpful in that regard as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can't complain that extra half hour to prep for the next week, right? Okay, great. That's really great, guys. I'll move on now to our final question that we've got, because I've just looked at the time and it's just flown by, and I knew it would. So the other thing that always comes out from CPD, and something we try and make sure we're thinking about all the time, I spoke about it, is that idea of it being progressive, that we're not having that just standalone CPD session because you've seen something great on YouTube, which you think everyone needs to have a look at, but actually, is it fitting into the bigger picture of what's going on? So I could ask you, how important do you think it is for it? But I think, yeah, I know what the answer is going to be. So in terms of progression and aligning and being cohesive, I just want you to think about, how do you make sure that you are doing that? Presuming we do think it's important. If you don't, you can also say that too. Rhiannon, if I come to you first this time, is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely hugely important. At our school, like many others, we kind of have our I mentioned it before, but like our academy improvement plan, which you know, come summer term, you're already thinking about based on what's happened this year, what are our actions for next year. As on top of that, there as well, some of our improvements aren't just a year. It's not like a year-long journey. You know, I'm thinking about our writing now, but we've kind of got a 3-year plan for that. Oracy, we've had a 3-year plan for that. So it really is kind of, you know, that theory of embedding change. It's not something that you, like you said, you see a great CPD, okay, let's just do that, it'll be great. It is kind of really thought out. You're thinking about the needs of your school, the needs of your staff. But on top of that as well, it's so you've got that kind of long-term plan, but within that as well, it's we don't want to plan the whole year either. It's really important because obviously there's ebbs and flows and everything, and it might be a point of gets to the end of autumn one, you think, oh, actually I'm really noticing this. I think we need to make sure that we've got either, you know, our coaching action steps are really going to focus on this particular area in maths, or we need to run some training on this, or co-planning needs to be centered around this because we're noticing that maybe some teachers need extra support within this area. So as much as you've got those long-term aims, you've also got some wiggle room to make sure that you're able to kind of be responsive to the needs of your school and your staff.
How do you make that decision then? So how do you make that decision to be, we've got this stuff that we want to do in a year, but we need to be responsive, as you said?
Yeah, so with our improvement plan, we try not to overload it. And it's so easier said than done. We're looking ahead to next year's, and it's already like, okay, well, how, like, you know, don't want to overload that. But then we plan our CPD half-termly, and that's done with the senior leadership team. So everyone can kind of have their say what they think what should be added. It's massively data driven, so it's really kind of looking at what teachers' action steps have been, what their observation action steps have been, to try and make sure that it's benefiting as many teachers as possible, from book look feedback, from monitoring visits and things like that. And then from there, we'll kind of start to fill a half term, but one half term at a time. So you might have an idea at the start of the year what CPD might look like, but you're actually only populating that calendar on a half termly basis, so you can make sure it's as purposeful as possible.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Teresa, I'll come over to you.
Yeah, so I echo everything that Rhiannon has said, and it is absolutely essential. And I also think it depends on where you are as a school at that particular point. So if you're a school that's just taking the programme on, or it's very new to you, you might have a bigger focus on some CPD, and there might be a bigger focus on maths that you'll be using inset days, training time, CPD sessions for, as we spoke about before. But I think as the school evolves, and for schools that have had the programme longer, it's about finding those opportunities to just drip feed that CPD in over time. If we just throw everything at everybody all the time, it's just going to be too overwhelming. Maths Mastery have been amazing at providing a wealth of CPD that is relevant and that is necessary for the programme to be successful in schools. And it's about making sure that we're flexible with that in our individual schools, and tailoring that to the needs of our of the children that we're teaching. And you know, just like the pupil, just like our children need you know, incremental CPD over time through like maths meetings and stuff, we're exactly the same. So it's about building it up slowly over time, I think, and finding those opportunities. Things like the teaching mastery course that you mentioned at the beginning, Anthony, I think are really good for maths leads, to be helping maths leads think through and to build their own subject knowledge. But I like the fact that it's all on demand, so that you don't have to follow it you know, segment by segment. You can mix and match which bits you need at a particular time. And other things like the teaching mastery webinars that come up, so that teachers are hearing those messages of what might be important to come up next, and your conferences as well that just pull everything together, which is fantastic. And I think for us, we're lucky being part of a trust that collaboration is a real huge advantage for us as well, that enables CPD to be cohesive and progressive across all of our schools. And that's both within our schools, but also we're very outward looking as well. So we would always welcome input from schools out of trust, and we would always support schools out of trust if they reached out as well.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I was going to mention about that collaboration, because that kind of, you mentioned about peer-to-peer observations and things earlier. And giving those opportunities for collaboration is something schools ask about quite a lot. And you've mentioned some of the ways you do it as a trust, but also we try as much as possible with Maths Mastery. If a school comes to us who's a single school out in the middle of Devon, shall we say, 25 miles from anything, if they come to us and contact us, we'll try and find out what they want some support with and connect them with someone else remotely who's doing that in their program and can offer them some support along the way. Other things that we offer in terms of that development is developing your maths lead. We have accreditations which go with that, which can also build up, and that offers more collaboration for your maths lead to make connections within our program leadership modules and time to discuss it with other maths leads. We've also got, if anyone's involved in MPQs, there's the brand new MPQ LPM, I'll get my letters correct there, which has started this year, and we're really proud that we've been involved in the writing of that MPQ LPM. So that's something that we try and knit in, and there's lots of opportunities for collaboration within that as well. Okay, it is 16:45, so I'm going to pause us there in terms of the questions. I just want to say a massive thank you to both Teresa and Rhiannon. We really, really appreciate you taking the time out to come talk to us about all the wonderful things that you're doing in your schools and your trusts to have such an impact. And we really value maths leads who invest so much in the program, and it's great just to see the success that you're having. And so thank you so much for that. Anyone who's watching this on demand, on a video, on the platform, if you want to know more, we're talking about CPD in this webinar, but if you want to know more about it, you should see some options below this session that you can go into and find out more about the program. And there'll also be a link there to get in touch with a member of our team to find out a little bit more information and find out next steps and what you can do following watching this video. But all that leaves me to say is thank you again to Teresa, to Rhiannon, and of course to Sophie for helping us out to create this webinar. Thank you very much, guys. I hope everyone has a wonderful